Vice-admiral Richard Stayner was an English naval officer who supported the Parliamentary cause during the English Civil War and the Interregnum. During the First Anglo-Dutch War he commanded the Foresight in actions at Portland and the Gabbard, and in the Battle of Scheveningen, 1653. During the Anglo-Spanish War, he won renown and a fortune in prize money when he captured great part of Spanish West Indian treasure fleet off Cadiz in 1656. He was knighted by the Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell for services in Admiral Robert Blake's destruction of Spanish ships at Santa Cruz, 1667. He was a rear admiral of the fleet which brought Charles II to England in 1660. He was again knighted at the Restoration. He died at Lisbon, while serving as Vice-Admiral of Mediterranean Fleet. Biography. Richard Stayner was one of several children of Roger Stayner of Tarrant-Gunville, Dorset. In his youth served in the Newfoundland fisheries trade. He joined the Parliamentary Navy and served in a subordinate rank during the Civil War. On the 22nd of June 1649 he was appointed commander of the Elizabeth Prize, now a States ship, though a very small one, her principal armament being 2 sakers. She was specially fitted out for surprising small picaroons that lurk among the sands on the Essex coast, and for convoy service in the North Sea. In August he captured the Robert, a small frigate, apparently one of Prince Rupert's vessels, for which and other good services he was awarded £20 and £5 for a gold medal. In November 1652 he commanded the Mermaid, fitting out at Chatham, but seems to have been moved from her in January to command the Foresight, which was one of the fleet with Blake in the Battle off Portland on the 18th of February 1652. He was certainly with the fleet in the following April, when he signed the Declaration of the Sea Officers on the dissolution of the Rump Parliament by Oliver Cromwell, which was, in fact, a resolution not to meddle with state affairs, but to keep foreigners from fooling us. In the battle off the Gabbard on 2–3 June 1653, Stayner commanded the Foresight in the White Squadron under the immediate command of William Penn, and was afterwards sent into the river in convoy of 12 disabled ships, 11 Dutch prizes, with 1,350 prisoners, and a body of Admiral Richard Dean, which he was ordered to take to Woolwich. Stayner rejoined the fleet in time to take part in the decisive Battle of Scheveningen and continued with it until the end of the season. In December he was strongly recommended by George Monk for a larger ship, and in the following January was appointed to the Plymouth, in which during the spring, until the end of the First Anglo-Dutch War, he was employed in active cruising in the North Sea, during which he made several captures, including one rich East Indiaman of 800 tons, having on board 4 chests of silver. In July he was appointed by Blake to the Catherine, and in September sailed for the Mediterranean with Blake, returning to England with him in October 1655. In the following February he was in command of the Bridgewater and sailed again with Blake for Cadiz, which was kept closely blockaded. In September, when the sea generals with the greater part of the fleet went to Aveiro, Stayner, then in the Speaker, was left off Cadiz in command of a small squadron of some 6 or 7 ships. On the 8th of September he fell in with the Spanish treasure fleet which, having information from a prize that the English had left the coast, was pushing on for Cadiz in such perfect confidence that, it is said, the Spaniards supposed Stayner's ships to be fishing vessels, yet 3 of Stayner's ships, at least the Speaker, Bridgewater, and Plymouth, were each of more than 900 tons. Nothing could be done that night, and the next morning several of Stayner's ships had fallen to leeward. He had only 3 with him, but these were the powerful ships just named, and as they were now within 12 miles of Cadiz, he judged that delay was unwise, and attacked the Spaniards about 9 o'clock in the morning. Of the 4 capital ships in the Spanish fleet, one escaped and ran for Cadiz, but struck on a rock and went to the bottom. The 3 others were captured, but 2 of them caught fire and were burnt with all the cargo and a great part of the men. The 4th remained in the possession of the English. Some of the other ships also were taken. The value of the prize to the captors was estimated at about £600,000, but it was stated by the Spaniards that the loss was not less than $9 million, or nearly £2 million sterling. The news of this tremendous blow reached England early in October. An official narrative of it was published on the 4th of October, and a Thanksgiving service ordered to be held on the 8th in all the churches in London and Westminster. Shortly after this, Stayner returned to England with Edward Montagu, but rejoined Blake early the next year, and took a brilliant part in the destruction of the Spanish ships at Santa Cruz on the 20th of April, having arranged the ships with the utmost care and judgment, and those ships being supported by a considerable number of forts and batteries on shore. The Spaniards thought themselves so perfectly secure, in case of an attack, that their admiral sent Blake an open defiance. On reconnoitering the force and position of the enemy, the English admiral found it impossible to bring off the enemy's ships, though gallantry and prudence might render it possible to destroy them. Stayner was immediately detached to begin the attack, and being supported by Blake with the remainder of the fleet, the Spaniards were, in a very few hours, driven out of their ships and breastworks. The former were instantly taken possession of by the English, and it being impossible to bring them off, they were all set on fire and burnt to the water's edge. The royalist politician and historian Edward Hyde, Earl of Clarendon, eulogized this action, writing, "The whole action was so miraculous, that all men who knew the place wondered that any sober men, with what courage soever endowed, would ever have undertaken it, and they could hardly persuade themselves to believe what they had done, whilst the Spaniards comforted themselves with the belief that they were devils, and not men, who had destroyed them in such manner." For his conduct on this occasion he was knighted by the Lord Protector Cromwell on his return to England in the following August. During the rest of the year and during 1658 he commanded in the Downs, nominally as second to Montagu, who was most of the time in London, and rarely as commander-in-chief, with his flag as rear admiral, sometimes in the Essex, sometimes in the London, and towards the end of the time in the Speaker. His work was entirely administrative, and he had no active share in the battles of Mardyke and Dunkirk, though he was in constant communication with Sir William Goodson, by whom they were entirely conducted. In the summer of 1659 he was rear admiral of the fleet with Montagu in the Sound, and on the 16th of April 1660 was appointed by Montagu to be rear admiral of the fleet which went over to bring King Charles II to England. For this service he was knighted on the 24th of September. In the early summer of 1661 Stayner was again commander-in-chief in the Downs, and in June sailed for Lisbon and the Mediterranean as rear admiral of the fleet under Montagu, now the Earl of Sandwich. When Sandwich went home in April 1662, Stayner, with his flag in the Mary, remained as vice-admiral of the fleet under Sir John Lawson. On the 2nd of July it was reported from Lisbon that he had just arrived from Tangiers. On the 20th of July that he was dangerously ill. On the 9th of October that he had died, apparently a few days before, in pursuance of his wish to be buried beside his wife, who seems to have died in 1658. His body was embalmed and brought home in the Mary, which arrived at Spithead on the 3rd of November. Family. Richard Stayner married Elizabeth, daughter of Thomas Hebb of Loughborough. They had two children, Richard and Elizabeth. On the 30th of May 1663, Richard petitioned for repayment of £300, which his father had advanced for the king's service. The claim was approved by Sandwich, but there is no mention of the money having been paid.